Well, this is going to be a strange one. I'm sitting here with my suitcase on the coffee table, having returned from a trip to Yorkshire. And this is an extra suitcase that we needed to buy to bring back the things that you and I, as readers and as writers, may occasionally slip into our luggage, slip into our suitcases, and bring with us on the aircraft because we thought it was a good idea at the time. Checking into the airport, this actually weighed 28 kilos, so I had to do a little bit of magic and move some of the items around to get them into my backpack to use as inboard cabin luggage. What I've brought here are things that mean such a lot to me, and for that reason I've got them in my suitcase. I've done a video before about what's in my writing bag, then I've changed writing bags, and 6 months later produced another little video, but this one I think will be a bit of a surprise because it's some of the goodies that I've brought with me from my home in Yorkshire. Some are emotionally attractive and things that I really want just to have in my study to give me that sense of happiness. It's one thing to be a writer and a reader, but I think when you add compulsive hoarder or collector, let's say more politely, to that, then we find other issues. And that's why I have here in front of me an extra new suitcase that I had to buy during the trip to Yorkshire, and 28 kilos of contents. Let's see what's inside the suitcase. And here we have the big reveal. Drum roll, please. Da, 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 da. 28 kilos of pure deliciousness and some real literary goodies to enjoy over the coming months and to really get myself into during the course of the winter. From Marks and Spencer, some delicious mince pies. Bags of mint humbugs, butter mintos, mint imperials, oh yes. Let me share this with you. We were in Edinburgh just a couple of weeks ago, and one of the places I wanted to visit was the Edinburgh Press Club, which is now a coffee shop. It's on Cockburn Street, but just up the hill from the Press Club, where we enjoyed some coffee, is the shop, the outlet shop for the Lochfine distillery. Inverary, the Lochfine blended Scotch whisky. I had to get that. That will last me quite a long time, probably 3 months, with a little bit of whisky once a week. But that's a great reminder of the time we had in Edinburgh. And again, it's something I can enjoy, but also it has memory attached to it. I'm back in the office and I have some books to sort out. What's interesting to me is why I've brought certain books back and the meaning that some of those have to me. Some of them are functional for writing activity over the next 3 to 6 months. Others are simply so that I can enjoy them and read them. The crime fiction is an example of that. I'm just going to run through some of these very quickly. Here are 3 very specific types of American fiction. One by Elmore Leonard, this one Mr. Paradise. He writes very amazing characters, very quirky, strange, chaotic, busy people with an incredible perspective on the life that they live. And so they become very interesting characters in his detective and police genre fiction. George Pelecanos, I was introduced to by John Harvey, the Nottinghamshire writer of police fiction and police procedural novels. And he was talking about his friendship with George Pelecanos at a literature festival that I went to in Ilkley several years ago. A couple of books by John Harvey from his Detective Resnick series based in Nottingham, my home city. And those are always of interest to me, not just for the police procedural, but for the way he talks about the county that I grew up in, the county that is part of my childhood. A couple of other books that I've picked up from a police perspective are 2 by Ian Rankin. I've always enjoyed his books. We were in Edinburgh a couple of weeks ago, so I went into a charity shop and I picked up a bunch of books, including 2 by Ian Rankin. Another writer that I've really enjoyed, I've only read a couple of his, but I read a superb one about the Isle of Lewis, which was really creepy, really scary, but also had a great backstory to orphanages and children's homes in Edinburgh 30 years prior, and from that came the story. But these two books, both by Peter May, and I'm looking forward to reading both of them. I've just started the first one, The Black House, and that's already got me to a point where I don't want to read it too late at night because it's really scary. Why am I reading books that scare me? Why do we watch films that sometimes thrill us but also takes us to the edge of fear? Who knows? So from that suitcase full of books, 28 kilos of goodies, 9 of those are police procedurals. And that's interesting because the book that I'm working on in NaNoWriMo is my second Nottingham crime fiction story. And these just keep me in that space of police procedural, police psychologists, forensic analysis, and the day-to-day process of a detective in the United Kingdom. The next grouping of books that I've compiled from the suitcase are books about folklore, country and rural stories, not just from the UK, some from Scandinavia and others from Germany. Most of these are new. I bought them while I was away a few weeks ago, and I need them because, having read several books recently by Susanna Scott, she writes amazing books about an individual, it's a different person in most of the stories, who will come to a rural location, meet new people, and inadvertently uncover or discover secrets that are known within the community. But her arrival on the scene causes a change in the relationships between the protagonists of the story or the members, the central members of the community, and opens up some superb storytelling, which I've really been enjoying. It takes me back to some of the stories that I read as an adolescent, but now I'm reading them as an adult and enjoying the human element, the community aspect, and the fact that the community is held together by a belief or a culture or a superstition that has been important to them being a strong community. Susanna Scott and a great series of books. I'll link some of those in the description, so read them and get hold of some of those and put them on your Kindle and really enjoy an evening in with a great book. But here I've bought a book of English folk tales, another one very similar, an anthology of English folk tales. This one I picked up in Edinburgh. I mentioned it in a video the other day, very briefly though. I picked it up from the place called the John Knox House, which is on the Royal Mile in Edinburgh. John Knox was a famous Presbyterian figure in Scottish history and brought about huge change within the church, but also naturally within society in Scotland. But his building, the John Knox House, is incredible, and now it's home to the Scottish Storytelling Centre. So that was a great place to buy a book about rural folklore, historical stories. Another one I picked up in Nottingham, Legends and Folklore of Nottinghamshire. Obviously it includes Robin Hood, but it includes also some of the great ghost stories from within Sherwood Forest, some of the recounting of tales from the military road that passes through the centre of the county, a very isolated, very rural location where it's obvious that all sorts of strange things are going to go bump in the night. This one I bought a couple of years ago and I've had it on my shelf in Yorkshire for a while. Mysterious Britain. There are so many things that I've been led to over the years as a walker on the footpaths of Britain. Strange things that have happened. Apparitions, sensations, and energies around stones or forest circles. But also it will open up old stories that I've read and long since forgotten, but which are somewhere here. And those stories and the ideas behind them were rekindled by reading Susanna Scott's books this summer. This one I've had for years, Nottinghamshire by Roy Christian. It's a great look at the history and lots of the anecdotes and stories of the big Nottingham houses and the parks called the Dukeries up in the north of the county, and it's superb. Neil Gaiman and his book on Norse mythology. It was great to pick the book up last week, stick it in my suitcase and bring it back with me so that I can enjoy it. This book, I remember exactly when I bought it. It was a Saturday morning in my village in Nottinghamshire, And I went into the library. They had a book sale on to let go of books that had been in and out of stock over the years. This book is from 1972. The illustrations are by a guy called Raymond Briggs, who wrote the classic story, The Snowman, which is a purely visual story that has no words to it, and it was turned into a beautiful film. And there it is, withdrawn for resale, 20 pence. What this book would cost now, second-hand, I don't know. I might have paid £10 for it if I came across it recently online and wanted to have it shipped to the house. The Hamish Hamilton Book of Giants. Another one here from the early 1900s, The Stories of King Arthur. There's a little pencil mark that says it was 1 shilling and 3pence. This copy is from 1927 and was reprinted from a 1903 edition. As collectors of anything, whether it's wristwatches or books, we have memories associated with the items that we collect. A wristwatch might be given for a wedding, for a birthday. It might be something that belonged to a grandparent. A book can have similar qualities. When I was a little boy, we had this book at home, and I remember it because not just of the stories and my mum or my dad taking turns to read stories to me as a little boy, perhaps 4, 5, 6 years old at night before bed, but I remember the illustrations. The illustrations within the book are by a man called Walter Crane and are from the original version of this book from 1886. This copy I've had 39 years. It was given to me by an American neighbor of mine when I lived in a tiny rural village in southern Mexico in 1983 and 1984, and Carlos, who was a painter and an artist of different fabrics and forms of art and sculpture, gave me this book in 1984. It's an amazing book, Household Stories by the Brothers Grimm. And of course the Brothers Grimm collected stories. They didn't make stories up, they didn't write their own stories. They collected folk tales and developed and added colour to some of those stories, and also changed some of those stories quite significantly from their original German and Danish and Scandinavian origins. But it's a great book, and the illustrations I'll show you in the video, they are superb. Household Stories by the Brothers Grimm. Another book when I was a teenager that I read was this one, The Weird Stone of Brisingamen by Alan Garner. It's a great story about some children who are out in the country and they find something different, and they enter that place, they go underground, and they have a series of adventures, and it's based around the area near Alderley Edge in South Manchester, which is an area where I've lived and spent time, and it's a beautiful part of the countryside. We were there again a few weeks ago. I bought this 50th anniversary edition of the book because it carries me straight back into my childhood and into my adolescence, that wonderful time when we are free of concerns other than what do we read, how do we explore, where do we escape to, what do we put into our minds to marvel at and wonder about. The Weird Stone of Brisingamen by Alan Garner. Other books here on thriftiness, financial behaviour, financial thinking, different processes around personal finance will probably feed into a new book that I have in mind for the new year, which will be part of the same series as Climbing Out of Debt and 10-Minute Budget. But those books will be useful as feeder items. There'll be little paragraphs or ideas that trigger something in my mind and that allow me to think, oh, that's a good idea for a new chapter or a subsection of a chapter. There are other books here which are about something I'm planning very much for the longer term. I read this book last year by Hugh Thompson. It's a beautiful book. It's called The Green Road Through the Trees, and it's his personal version of following the Icknield Way footpath across the country. If you've read anything by Edward Thomas or William Henry Davis or Robert Frost, you will have a sense of that connection to the trampers of Old England and their movement through the countryside. This is a very modern book written less than 10 years ago, and it follows Hugh with his rucksack and with his tent, staying sometimes in bed and breakfasts or hostels, but walking through the history of England and recounting his personal experience of that beautiful footpath that goes diagonally from the English Channel over to the North Sea. And following on from that one by Robert Macfarlane, it's probably my favourite of his books about the countryside and the power of nature to captivate and pull us into that natural experience of being out and about in connection with the earth, in connection with the sky and the birds around us. It's called The Old Ways, and I'm just going to read something from the back. It says, following the tracks, holloways, drove roads and sea paths that form part of a vast ancient network of routes crisscrossing the British Isles and beyond, Robert Macfarlane discovers a lost world, a landscape of the feet and the mind, of pilgrimage and ritual, of stories and ghosts, above all of the places and journeys which inspire and inhabit our imaginations. I love a footpath. I love disappearing for a few days at a time with a rucksack and a machete, or a rucksack and a walking stick, or being out for the afternoon with an ordnance survey map and a compass, and finding myself in a part of the country that is completely new to me and fresh to me, but reading the terrain and enjoying the places where I am. So there we have it. I've worked through 3 little sections of books, one on crime fiction, one on mysticism and folklore, and then just a couple of books to do with exploring the landscape and finding yourself at peace in the countryside. That's what's in my suitcase. I'm so pleased that I brought all of that home. And of course, I've still got chocolate biscuits, Marks and Spencer Percy Pigs, mince pies, and a bottle of blended whiskey from Loch Fyne. Wherever you are and whatever's on your shelf, happy reading.